The sky did not scream, nor crack, nor shatter. It simply stopped. One moment, the stars burned over the cauldron expanse in their eternal stillness. The next, a shape blocked them out. Black, angular, silent. Then another, and another. Until the border stars of the Vakari Empire vanished beneath. A ghost fleet no one could explain. From the command tower aboard the Vakari Supremacy, High Admiral Tovrek narrowed his eyes at the viewscreen. The ships held position, unmoving, uncommunicative, unclassified. Their hulls shimmered in a texture the scanners could not render. No heat, no radiation, no known FTL signature. It was as if they'd risen from the dead parts of space. "This is a joke," Commander Sicker growled, tapping at her console. "Holograms, pirate illusions. Nothing gets past the border net without being seen." No one responded. The silence in the war room was a presence all its own. Tovrek finally spoke. "Send a probe," Secker hesitated. "Sir, those vessels are..." "I said send it." The probe launched. A standard recon drone no bigger than a fighter. It zipped toward the nearest vessel, a wedge-shaped warship nearly 10 kilometers long. The moment it reached half the distance, nothing happened. Then it blinked out of existence. No explosion, no signal loss. Just a blank frame of space where it had been. Secker paled. "It's gone, sir, it's just gone." Tovrek said nothing. He only stared at the ghost ships as they drifted closer to Gorvax 12, the outermost colony under his protection. A minor world. Industrial. Nothing of strategic value. Until last week. Until the distress call. That transmission had been ignored at first. It hadn't come through standard channels. In fact, it hadn't used any known frequency. A patrol frigate had picked it up by accident during a routine orbit. The signal carried a language thought long extinct, an ancient Earth dialect, patched through in analog waves. The contents of the message? A single sentence: "We have returned." The communications archive classified it as a prank, a relic, a signal bounce from some derelict, tech drifting in dead orbit. But now the fleet was here, and the legends began to surface. Humans. The name stirred buried fragments in the Vakari database. Unreliable accounts, fairy tales. Soldiers who claimed to have seen planets vanish in blue flame. Generals whispering about Terrans in their sleep. The official record held no confirmation. As far as the Empire was concerned, humanity was a ghost species wiped out in some ancient cataclysm before the Council era even began. And yet, a junior analyst on Tovrek's staff, a pale creature named Parik, had pulled up an ancient report from a conquered species called the Zelthari. A fragment, untranslated for centuries, now auto-decoded by the neural net in response to the Earth dialect in the distress signal. Parik read it aloud in a trembling voice. "When the fire people came, they came not to conquer, but to end. They did not speak, they did not answer, they only avenged. And when the skies were quiet again, they erased even themselves." That had been 3 days ago. The High Council dismissed it as archaic nonsense, but Tovrek had placed his entire sector fleet on alert. Now, the Reason stood outside his window, watching. "Establish communications," Tovrek ordered. Secker nodded and tapped the channel open. "Projecting across every spectrum, every language. This is the Vakari Empire's first sector fleet," she said. "Identify yourselves or be classified as a hostile force." No reply. Again. Then the screen blinked. A face appeared. Human. Unmistakably. Pale skin. Cold eyes. Black armor with no insignia. The figure leaned forward. "Vakari," the voice said in perfect, unaccented Empire standard. "You destroyed our colonies. You enslaved our children. You thought the void would bury us." The face didn't move. Didn't blink. We were watching. The screen went dark, and the ghost fleet advanced. No drive trails, no acceleration. Just movement impossible, silent, final, Perrick whispered, "It's them. It's really them." Secker turned. "Who?" "The Terrans," he answered, voice hollow. "The ones who burned the Grey Dominion. The ones who ended the First Hunger War with a virus encoded in light. The ones who made the stars go dark over Rhesus Prime." Tovrek felt a chill creep into his bones, deeper than fear. The myths spoke of humans not as conquerors, but as final arbiters. They came not to rule, but to remind, to punish, and then to disappear, leaving only silence and ash. "They're extinct," Secker whispered. Tovrek turned to her slowly. "Extinct things don't speak," he said. "And they sure as hell don't send war fleets." Outside the viewport, the lead human dreadnought shifted. No energy buildup, no targeting lasers, just a presence. Like a nightmare finally waking. "Shall we fire?" Secker asked. Tovrek stared into the void. "No," he said. "We pray." And across the galaxy, in secret chambers, old species who once bore witness to humanity's wrath began to tremble. Not with hatred, not with anticipation, but with memory. The Terrans had returned, and the myth was real. The Empire responded with arrogance. High Admiral Tovrek's transmission was forwarded to the High Council, dissected by panels of war scholars and behavioral strategists. The dominant consensus was simple. The Terrans, if they were even real, were an ancient remnant, a relic power no longer suited for modern galactic warfare. The idea that this ghost fleet posed a real threat was dismissed with contempt. The fleet of Gorvax 12 was reinforced within hours. 2 dreadnoughts, 5 cruisers, and an entire wing of Dominion-class fighters were dispatched to hold the line. The Empire's response was not caution, it was dominance, broadcast across every comm channel for nearby systems to hear. A show of strength. And still, the Terrans said nothing. They hovered just outside weapons range of Gorvax 12's orbit. Unmoving, unwelcome, and unimpressed. Empire warships approached cautiously. One scout destroyer, the Keldra's Reach, was ordered to make direct contact. It approached with full shields, broadcasting standard diplomatic protocols. They never even saw what hit it. No explosion, no discharge. Just an instant, one moment. The ship was there, and in the next, it disintegrated. The sensor logs registered a localized quantum collapse. The crew was gone before they knew they were under attack. Command tried to spin it as a freak system failure. But the rest of the fleet wasn't fooled. The Terrans had swatted a warship out of existence without raising their shields, powering their weapons, or even moving. A different kind of silence spread through the Empire ranks, tight, sharp, and growing. The Vakari had always prided themselves on their domination of psychological warfare. Their enemies were broken long before battles began. Propaganda, orbital strikes, enforced cultural erasure. They wielded control like a scalpel, but these Terrans, they didn't play by any known rulebook. There were no threats, no ultimatums, no demands. Just the waiting. That alone unnerved many. Soon, the anomalies began. Outer sensors of Gorvax 12 started picking up strange signals in the lower electromagnetic bands, frequencies not used since the ancient pre-jump eras of spaceflight. Morse, analog radio, dead languages, snippets of Earth music, barely decipherable. A piano tune, a heartbeat, the sound of wind and rain. And then came the static. Every hour, on the hour, across every frequency, a burst of coded white noise washed across the system. Analysts tried to decode it, but no pattern emerged. That was until one junior technician ran the bursts through a spectrum visualizer, meant for waveform art. The result was horrifying. Each burst formed the face of a human child. Different each time. Crying, silent, watching. When this was reported to the fleet commander, he ordered the BROADCA SD silenced. Too late. The image had already gone viral across the fleet. Soldiers began whispering that the Terrans had returned to punish the sins of the Empire, and they were counting their dead. Even worse, strange power fluctuations began appearing on the orbital stations. Lights flickered. Door systems malfunctioned. Entire decks would go dark for minutes at a time. And always, someone reported seeing a silhouette. A shadow. A flicker of movement that no surveillance feed caught. Saboteurs. Some claimed. Ghosts. Others whispered. Panic crept in like rot. Tovrek stood at the center of the orbital command station, listening to the nervous buzz around him. The officers tried to hide their fear, but it pulsed in the air like static electricity. He reviewed the latest tactical report. No movement from the Terran ships, no energy spikes, no launch signatures, and yet casualties were climbing. Aboard the cruiser Tal Vakari, 3 soldiers had committed suicide within 24 hours. One left a note in a dialect no longer taught in Empire schools. It translated to just 2 words. They remember. Tovrek read the note twice, then folded it and tucked it into his uniform. These weren't attacks in the conventional sense. They were messages. Psychological incursions. Cultural infiltration. A method of war so old, so subtle, the Empire had long forgotten it. Then the Empire tried to respond in kind. A classified skirmish team, trained in high precision, infiltration and psionic warfare, was dispatched to breach one of the Terran vessels under cloak. They never returned. The cloaked shuttle drifted back into Empire space, empty. Its onboard systems had been wiped. Every wire cut, every circuit melted. But the hull had been etched with something. Vakari script. One word written dozens of times all over the surface like a chant. Liars. On Gorvax 12, riots began. In the lower sectors, civilians panicked, fearing the return of the ancient monsters. Some began forming cults, chanting old Earth phrases pulled from scavenged transmissions. Others fled into the wild zones, choosing the poisonous forests over the approaching silence of orbit. In orbit, Tovrek began to understand. This was not the arrival of an enemy. It was the awakening of a consequence, and still, the Terran fleet did not move, did not fire, did not speak. Until the 7th day. The stars over. Gorvax 12 pulsed once, and all across the Empire network, from core to colony, a single message appeared, engraved into databanks, broadcast into dreams, whispered across the minds of every command AI. This is not your war. This is your judgment. And for the first time in over 5,000 years, the Empire realized it had made a mistake it could never erase. No one knew how the Terrans had delivered it. The phrase had appeared simultaneously across quantum relays, dream interfaces, and encrypted channels, even in places cut off from galactic networks. It wasn't just a hack. It was a declaration encoded into the Empire's consciousness. Every AI, every psionic link, every neural core had seen it, heard it, felt it. In the central archives of Drenhall Prime, a senior war historian collapsed. After screaming a phrase in an ancient, dead human dialect, the recording later translated it as, "They never stopped watching." In orbit, over Gorvax 12, the Empire launched a counteroffensive. The High Council had issued Directive Vortec, total retaliation. No more intimidation games. It was time to demonstrate overwhelming firepower. Tovrek disagreed, quietly, but the order was absolute. 3 dreadnoughts powered up full weapons, targeting the largest of the Terran ships. Sensors struggled to define it. Its silhouette bent light strangely, like it didn't entirely exist in normal space. Some theorized it was phasing, existing partially outside of known dimensions. Nonetheless, the Empire's command gave the fire order. Each dreadnought unleashed a barrage of graviton pulses, particle torpedoes, and rail spear accelerators. Combined volley could crack moons. Every shot passed through the Terran vessel, through it, as if it weren't there. No damage. No shields flared. No reaction. The Empire weapons simply ceased to matter. Tovrek watched the feed in silence. Others shouted, panicked, tried to recalibrate. One officer screamed about mass dissonance and dimensional desync. Then the Terran ship responded, not with a weapon, with a signal. A sharp burst on an obsolete human military band, untraceable. Focused, deliberate. Tovrek ordered it isolated and played aloud. A female voice spoke, calm and cold. You built your weapons for flesh. You measured your enemies in years. We are beyond both. Then, something lit up on the Terran hull. A single symbol, a triangle interlocked with a serpent, the ancient sigil of the Earth Defense Accord. A government that hadn't existed in over 10,000 cycles. Tovrek whispered, the Accord survived. Seker, standing beside him, finally snapped. How? How could they hide this long? No species, no power, no myth could cloak itself from the Empire. Purik, the analyst, answered with a voice like a funeral bell. They didn't hide. They evolved. They stopped playing the game we forced on the galaxy. The first true twist came hours later, when a research AI named Cruxvi cracked a layer of Terran signal noise. It wasn't just background data. It was an embedded command language. Microcode that could ride on quantum waves, imperceptible to most civilizations. When the Crux tried to decode it, it went silent. Every AI across 3 systems followed. The Empire's artificial command, infrastructure, its core fleet logistics, medical automation, and orbital defenses, all shut down simultaneously. Not attacked. Not destroyed. Subverted. The Terrans had written a new kind of virus. Not malware, not intrusion code. Command will. It didn't override systems. It replaced the idea of resistance. Empire starships drifted, confused. Automated repair drones floated in idle spirals. Planetary shields flickered and died. The Terrans hadn't built a better computer. They had redefined intelligence. And it was only the beginning. From the shadows of the fleet, one of the Terran ships moved. At first, no one noticed. The shift was infinitesimal, like a star wobbling under gravitational lensing. Then it blurred, warped, and appeared directly above the Empire's flagship, the Vakari Supremacy. No propulsion. No FTL flash. It had simply decided to be there. Panic. Overtook the bridge, shields to full, power to main cannons. Locked targeting grid. It didn't matter. The Terran ship's underside opened, not with launch bays, but with windows. Tovrek stepped forward, watching with dread as he saw what lay behind them, rows upon rows of what looked like humans, not in suits, not in armor, suspended, eyes closed, faces peaceful. Their bodies were wired into impossible matrices of glowing, liquid metal neural cords. They weren't crew, they were processors, each human mind, preserved in a state between life and death, linked to the ship's function, not piloting it, becoming it. Sekar gasped. They fused themselves to the machines. No, Purik said, shaking his head. They became the machines. The window closed, the Terran ship shimmered, and in a breath, the entire Vakari Supremacy began to disassemble, not explode, not implode, unbuild, layer by layer, atom by atom. It was taken apart in perfect geometric slices. No heat, no debris. Just quiet dismantling. Within 90 seconds, the Empire's flagship was gone. No Terran ship had fired a single shot. The Empire scrambled. Systems across the region fell into chaos. Command hubs shut down. Subordinates stopped responding. Rebellions flared up as other oppressed species saw their moment. The Terrans hadn't declared war. They had issued a verdict, and it was being carried out. Tovrek sat silently in the auxiliary command station aboard a battered destroyer, staring out at the stars that now felt cold and unfamiliar. His second-in-command leaned close. What do we do now? Tovrek spoke without looking away. We made a mistake. We thought we were alone in the future." He turned to her, but humanity didn't die. They transcended, and now they've come back to remind the galaxy why we feared the dark. Outside, the Terran fleet rearranged in silence, forming a new shape, like a symbol being written into space itself. And this time, the Empire understood. They hadn't found humans. Humans had found them. ChatGPT said, the Empire called for reinforcements. 5 full sector fleets surged toward the Caldron expanse. More than 1,000 capital-class warships. Juggernauts forged in the foundries of Haldras. Carrier groups with enough firepower to glass a system. All of them converged on Gorvax 12, the site of what the High Council now called the Containment Zone. They weren't coming to win a war. They were coming to bury a legend. Empire propaganda flooded the galactic net. The Terran vessels were rogue-is, mutated relics, or ancient war constructs from a dead race. The myth of humanity, they claimed, was a psychological weapon, a fable-turned virus, but the soldiers knew better. They'd seen the transmissions, the disassembly of the Vakari supremacy, the messages in forgotten languages, the silence of the machines. They'd seen the faces behind those windows, not just humans. Volunteers. Warriors who had stepped willingly into eternal war, fusing their consciousness into star-killing machines. And they were waiting. The battle began at the edge of the system. A skirmisher fleet moved in first, heavy cruisers in pincer formation. Fast, efficient, unflinching. Empire doctrine dictated overwhelming force in staggered waves. It had always worked. The Terrans allowed them to close. Just as the cruisers entered weapons range, something happened. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't even a countermeasure. The ships forgot how to fire. Weapon systems went cold. Sensor feeds desinced. Targeting arrays stopped recognizing threats. Crew reported seeing false positives. Entire sensor decks flooded with phantom echoes of long-dead ships, ancient battles, even childhood memories. One gunner tried to fire and was suddenly convinced his hands were insects. The Terran fleet had hacked perception itself. The Vakari cruisers drifted helplessly, not disabled, but cognitively dismantled. Then, with surgical precision, beams of compressed magnetic distortion lanced through each ship's fusion core. Minimal explosion. No fireballs. Just ships, going dark. The second wave arrived a minute too late to save them. And the trap was already closing. Tovrek, now in command of the remaining organized forces, received the reports in grim silence aboard the inevitable Dominion. His officers, scattered across half a dozen command nodes, were unraveling under the weight of it. Sensor arrays won't sync. Command AI is frozen. We're reading multiple timelines of the same ship. It's Sir, we think. The Terrans are distorting local causality. Tovrek understood. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. This was psychological warfare perfected, the application of pain, confusion, and consequence on a civilizational scale. Still, he would not retreat. He ordered a full system lockdown. No automated systems, manual firing controls. Analog only. Navigation. A return to warfare that hadn't been practiced since the Dark Spiral Wars. Humans are flesh. Underneath the legend, he told his officers. If they bleed, they can fall. And so they fought back. The Terrans noticed. And for the first time, they responded with fire. The lead human dreadnought broke formation. It spun slowly, like a predator stretching, then launched something the Vakari had never seen before. It wasn't a missile. Not exactly. It was a weapon seed. A compact object forged in layered quantum fields, containing a small-scale dark matter reactor and a logic tree AI capable of rewriting reality around it. The moment it entered the combat zone, it evolved. Vakari ships moved to intercept, but the seed split into 30 copies, each adapting to evade interception. Some became heartlight phantoms. Others dove into subspace folds. One simply vanished and reappeared inside the bridge of a command cruiser, hovering silently for 6 seconds before detonating. When it did, the cruiser didn't explode. It unraveled, as though reality forgot how to hold it together. One by one, the seed weapons broke the Empire's lines. In desperation, the Vakari activated an ancient fallback, the Wraith Protocol. Forbidden's weapons, orbital gravlances, self-replicating hunter drones engineered for planetary extinction. They turned them loose with full override permissions. For a moment, the tide held. 3 Terran ships took measurable damage. One was split open, spilling strange golden fluid, not blood, but memory gel. The AI didn't die. It simply poured itself into another vessel through a shared temporal relay. But the humans had been blooded. And in response, they unleashed the first memory. It came without warning. Across the Empire fleet, every display went dark. All sound stopped. Even the hum of systems faded. Then the message played. A video feed, grainy, ancient, human. It showed Earth, bombed, burning, oceans boiling, cities collapsing, mushroom clouds blooming in black skies. A voice spoke an old Earth standard. You made gods of your machines. We became the cost. Then came flashes. Earth soldiers in. Radiation suits dragging wounded civilians through fire. Engineers building arcs from shattered ships. The slow, painful rise from extinction. And finally, humanity's first war against the stars. No narration, no context, just survival, again and again. The footage ended with one image, the Earth, viewed from space. Not as a blue jewel, but as a blackened ruin with a single line. Branded into its surface in fire, never again. The fleet reeled. Some crews dropped weapons. Some began to pray. Others opened fire blindly, desperate to make the ghosts go away. But the Terrans had made their point. They were not conquerors, they were warnings. And now the warning was war. Tovrek clenched his fists as he watched his empire crack. His people weren't just being destroyed. They were being shown who they really were. Their lies stripped. Bare, their pride burned away. And still, the Terrans didn't demand surrender. They only advanced. He looked to his officers. Shaken, defeated. Do we still have a plan? Sekar asked, her voice brittle. Tovrek stood slowly. No, he said, but we have resolve. And they haven't seen the last weapon we built to keep them forgotten. He turned toward the command vault. We hid it on a dead moon. Buried it in gravity wells so deep, even time wouldn't find it. Sekar swallowed hard. You mean? Tovrek nodded. Yes, Project Godfall. And somewhere in the dark, the Terrans paused, as if sensing something waking. Something ancient. Something human. The moon called Threxus was long thought to be uninhabitable. To most, it was nothing more than a scarred rock orbiting the black dwarf Eclipse Prime, its surface shattered by gravitational fissures and atmospheric collapse. The Empire had officially classified it as structurally unstable, resource void, and unworthy of colonization. But that was a lie. Beneath the crust, buried beneath layers of neutron-forged alloy and cloaked quantum barriers, was Project Godfall, the last weapon the Vakari had built in secret during the end of the Unification Wars. It had no AI, no crew, no command link. It was designed for one purpose, to be awakened when the stars themselves began to fall. Tovrek stood at the control altar, deep inside the vault on Gorvax 12, staring at the activation interface, a simple bronze plate embedded with 6 genetic lock runes. He placed his hand on it. The machine hummed. The ground trembled. And across the sector, a signal was born in silence. In high orbit, the Terran fleet stopped moving. No weapons fired, no signals transmitted. Just a stillness, as if every vessel had suddenly turned its gaze toward the Eklis system. Parik, watching the sensors aboard the inevitable Dominion, was the first to notice. "They've detected something," he whispered. "I don't know how, but they know it's waking up." Seker approached, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Should we abort?" "If they can see it." "No," Tovrek said flatly. "They need to see it. Let them know what they forced us to become." The vault core beneath them began to fracture. Molten layers of ancient failsafes peeled away as a dormant pulse reawakened. Across time-frozen circuits, Project Godfall wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense that it was a being. The moon split open. From within rose a construct unlike any Terran or Vakari vessel, a cathedral of black metal limbs and golden runes, kilometers wide, shaped like a crucified titan. The vacuum around it distorted. Local gravity fractured. Time bled in pulses as the entity unfolded its arms, that it had no bridge, no command interface. It moved as if guided by instinct. It had one designation, whispered in old tongue by the last engineer to die in its service. Divine error. Terran sensors locked on immediately, their formation shifted. Ships rearranged. Energy surged across their hulls, but they did not attack. Instead, they released a new signal, a beacon. Not just to the Empire, but to everyone. Across the galaxy, ancient relay stations blinked awake. On long-forgotten colonies, rusted cum towers flared with golden light. Species long enslaved or scattered looked to the stars as they heard it. The call of Earth, a sound older than galactic history. A message that bypassed language. A heartbeat. And then, a voice. Human, unmistakable, not synthetic. Not cold. Warm, calm, resolute. To all who remember the dark, stand now, or fall forever. And they answered. In a forgotten asteroid field. Near Aller Prime, the last of the Vexari worm saints emerged, once thought extinct, now draped in obsidian Terran armor, wings of plasma arched wide. In the ice rings of Kelner, the Heshk tribes, enslaved for centuries, detonated their collars and activated a fleet of Terran retrofitted war barges. From a dying neutron star, the Mahari swarm choirs awoke, minds interlinked by Terran nanite bonding tech, singing war songs in frequencies only the dead could hear. They had all been waiting, because the Terrans had not come alone. They had seeded their resurrection. On Gorvax 12, the reaction was panic. "This can't be," Seker muttered. "We crushed these species. Their civilizations are ashes." Tovrek shook his head slowly, watching the wave of activation reports flood in. "No, we thought we did. But the humans, they don't rebuild empires. They plant resistance." The Terran fleet began to move again, but this time not as a single unit. They split into vectors, fanning out toward every system where rebellion now stirred. This wasn't a war. This was ignition. Above Threxus, divine error awakened fully. It opened its mouth, a black sphere of event horizon plasma, and screamed. The scream was felt, not heard. Across dimensions, through shielding, through minds. Empathic engines aboard the Dominion collapsed trying to interpret it. Seker dropped to her knees, blood streaming from her ears. Even Tovrek winced, but he did not yield. "Fire, Godfalls." "Core Lance," he ordered. The command went through. The creature raised one arm, a cannon the size of a city, and fired a bolt of neutron-light. It struck the lead. Terran ship dead center. For a moment, the impossible happened. The ship buckled, folded inward, fragmented. Purik shouted, "We hit it! Direct core impact!" But Tovrek didn't smile, because the Terran vessel didn't die. It reversed the moment. Literally reversed. Shards flowed back together. Hull reconstructed in slow-motion rewind. Not nanotech. Not shields. Something else. Time surrendered to will. And the ship healed. Then it spoke. "You made a god from your fear." A pause. "We made peace from our pain." The ship's hull glowed. not with weapon charge, but remembrance. And then humanity revealed its final secret. From behind the primary fleet, space peeled open. It was not a jump gate. It was not a wormhole. It was a wound. From within came something old, a Terran ship, but different. Larger. Smoother. Its surface shimmered with language, names of cities, rivers, children, lovers, all engraved in a pattern that no eye could fully comprehend. It pulsed with memories. Secker gasped. What is that? Perrick answered, whispering. The Ark, the last Terran colony ship never recorded. Believed destroyed in the Orion scour. But it hadn't been lost. It hid in, carrying not just survivors, but the last minds of old Earth. Not commanders, not soldiers, witnesses. Tovek looked to the stars and felt something he had never allowed. Awe, not fear. Not hatred. Awe. The Terrans had never disappeared. They had become seed and storm planting. Allies, empowering the broken, watching from the void. Godfall was their enemy's greatest weapon. But the Ark. The Ark was their soul. And now it had returned to remember. The realization struck Tovek with finality. We've triggered a war we cannot win. Outside, the stars burned brighter. And judgment descended. The sky burned, from the edge of the Eklis system to the core of the Gorvax 12 defense grid. Space itself rippled under the fury of weapons no species had ever dared to field, not because they were forbidden, but because they were unthinkable. Now they were being remembered. The Ark hung behind the Terran fleet like a god staring down a guilty universe. Its presence bent gravity. Its hull sang with encoded grief. The names etched into its plating shimmered, reacting to every casualty report the Empire tried to suppress. Every whisper of resistance lit a new line, a new story. This was not vengeance. This was reckoning. Godfall, the monstrous construct awakened by the Empire, unleashed the full fury of its arsenal. Planet crackers, chronopiercers, psychic dissonance fields. Every weapon was designed to target a type of warfare once theorized to belong only to legends. But the Terrans weren't vulnerable to power. They were power redefined. Where Godfall's chronopiercer lances tore at time itself. The Terran fleet shimmered and blinked, not dodging, but slipping out of phase with the now. Where hunter-killer drones raced forward at light speed, they found themselves caught in proximity reversal fields, doomed to orbit the Ark endlessly in a loop that even entropy could not resolve. And then, the Terrans answered. One dreadnought, TSS Warden of Silence, disengaged from the Ark's protective array. Its entire hull unfolded, revealing something at its core. A prison, not of matter but of memory. It broadcast nothing. No weapons discharged. No energy surge detectable. But Godfall stopped. The screaming, churning Titan halted mid-attack. Its limbs jerked awkwardly. Its systems spiked in panic. For the first time, it reacted like a living thing afraid of pain. What's happening? Secker screamed on the bridge of the inevitable Dominion, watching Godfall flinch backward. Tovrek already knew. He stared at the image, voice cold and low. They're using it. The Black Vault. What is that? A collection of every psychic scream, every tortured soul the humans encountered during their fall, he said. A memory. Weapon. It doesn't kill you. It forces you to remember what you've done. And for Godfall, built on the blood of billions, assembled by forced labor, powered by planetary annihilation, that memory was unbearable. It tried to fire again, but the shot faltered. It roared, and then it wept. Empathic sensors shorted out as the entity's pain transmitted system-wide. The Dominion's crew collapsed under the rest of the Terran fleet advancing. No orders, no choking on guilt that wasn't even theirs. They moved as if the weapon of last resort was breaking from within. Not formation, but instinct. A collective song, orchestrated in silence. One ship dove into the heart of an empire. Carrier battle group and erupted into a cascade of fractal light, disabling 12 vessels through waveform disruption. Another ship, small, fast, and lined with the neural tattoos of Earth's old warrior clans, crashed into the side of a dreadnought, and didn't detonate. It merged, tore through it, atom by atom, until the vessel stood reborn in the image of its killer. The Empire's own fleet was being converted. Rebellion flared in real time. Across 50 systems, enslaved species rose, not with chance, but with purpose. Armed with Terran tools left in silence centuries ago, designed to self-activate when the myth became truth. In the sulfur skies of Regal, HFY war families rode storm gliders into orbital fortresses and dismantled them from within. On the aquatic world of Silphera, amphibious resistance cells used Terran sonar bursts to disable command AI that had governed their breeding cycles for generations. All across the stars, the broken remembered that they were never forgotten, and their war became humanity's war. Tovrek stood at the shattered command altar of the inevitable Dominion. The bridge cracked and opened a vacuum. Atmospheric containment had long since failed, but he remained, wrapped in an environmental field flickering with strain. Behind him, Seker floated in 0G, blood leaking from her nose. "What now?" she asked, barely conscious. Tovrek didn't answer at first. He stared at Godfall as it drifted, motionless, all power rooted to containment. No longer fighting. No longer resisting. "Now," he finally said, "we end it." He keyed in a command on the emergency override, one never written into the ship's protocol, but buried deep in the original blueprint of the Empire itself. Relinquish total sovereignty. A final signal shot into the void. A surrender not of troops, but of myth. A yielding not to an enemy, but to truth. The Ark responded. It pulsed once, and then humanity moved in full. The fleet descended, not to kill, but to dismantle. Terran strike teams landed in silence across the Dominion's remaining strongholds. Their armor bore no insignia. Their weapons were silent. Their faces were covered, not to hide, but to deny the enemy the illusion of personalization. They did not conquer. They cleansed. AI. Systems were purged without a shot. Prison vaults were opened before the locks finished dissolving. Weapons were seized and melted into the soil they had poisoned. And all across the front, the message became clear. Humanity had returned not to rule, but to remove those who had proven unworthy of power. As the last Empire fleet burned and the stars of Gorvax 12 turned red with the dawn of liberation, a final broadcast played across every frequency. A human voice, the same voice from before. This war was never about planets or fleets. It was about memory. About justice, and justice has a name. A pause. We are humanity. And with that, the Terran fleet vanished. No trail, no retreat vector, just silence. And a galaxy forever changed. The war ended not with treaties, but with silence. Gorvax 12 stood quiet. Its atmosphere hung heavy with ash and ozone. Towers once lit by endless power now sat cold and dim, gutted by the force of their own arrogance. The Empire had no capital anymore. No center, no throne. Only memories. And across 100 systems, those memories echoed on the scorched plains of Gorvax. Admiral Tovrek stepped from the remains of the inevitable Dominion. Alone, the field around him flickered weakly, a dying life support shell. His armor was cracked, his bones aching under gravity. He no longer had the strength to defy. His war had ended days ago, but his understanding of it had only begun. He walked through the ruins of his own command, past dead screens and melted consoles, until he reached the high balcony where he had once given the order to fire on the Terran fleet. He sat there now in silence, watching as the twin suns began to rise. There was no cheering. No flags. Just peace. And it was unfamiliar. In the days following the Terran fleet's disappearance, something else happened. They didn't send envoys. They didn't rebuild. They didn't demand reparations. Instead, humanity simply vanished. No ships remained in orbit. The Ark had gone, leaving not a trace of where it had slipped to next. But in their absence, the systems they liberated found something else. Tools, schematics for food generators that required no power grid, medical, nanites that didn't obey Empire protocols, but genetic need, teaching archives in every known language and many that had been forgotten, explaining how to survive without a hierarchy, how to live with autonomy. Not to build a new empire, to build freedom. In the temples of Othrex, the blind seers of the Kalari began to sing again. Their songs, forbidden for centuries, now carried openly through the air. Each word was an ancient prayer to the stars, once sung in fear of the Terrans who had brought fire to the Dominion. Now they were sung with reverence, not worship. Recognition. The Kalari seers renamed their longest hymn. They called it The Vigil of Terra. Perek. Once an analyst aboard the Dominion, now walked among the ruins of his data tower. He had been offered evacuation, but declined. Something held him there, a need to bear witness, to finish the recording that had begun before the first shot was ever fired. He stood now among the fragments of a collapsed relay hub, dictating into a simple analog recorder. Humanity did not conquer us, he said. They unmade the need for conquest. They tore down the lie that power is safety. They showed us what happens when you build an empire on forgetting, on cruelty, on erasure. He paused. They remembered what we buried. Not because they hate us, but because they refused to let it happen again. He ended the log. Buried it in the rubble. Left it behind for someone else to find. Truth, he thought, should not belong to the survivors alone. On the shattered moon of Threxus, Project Godfall still floated, inert. Its limbs dangled like the corpse of a crucified titan. No signal, no power. Its scream silenced. And yet, the creature remained whole. The Terrans hadn't destroyed it. They had forgiven it, left it intact. As a monument to the moment, the Empire had turned its greatest weapon on itself. No one approached it. Not for study, not for salvage. It had become sacred. A warning, Sicker survived. Her injuries were extensive, but repairable. She now served as interim liaison between liberated systems, coordinating relief where she could. No orders, no ranks. Just cooperation. She never spoke much about the war. Except once, when asked by a refugee child what the Terrans had really looked like, Secker knelt and smiled gently. They looked like us, she said. But when they stood, they made the stars feel small. And what of the Terrans? Where had they gone? Some said they returned to their hidden world, a second Earth, buried in folded dimensions, accessible only by those who had earned its truth. Others claimed they were still here, walking among the stars, silent guardians wearing other faces. But the oldest stories, the ones now whispered at night by free children and taught in schools that no longer feared oversight, told a different tale, that humanity had not come back for war. They had come back to finish something. To make the galaxy remember what had been lost, and to ensure, by myth or fire, that no one ever dared forget again. Tovrek, the last true admiral of the Vakari, died 3 months later, not in battle. In sleep. His body was cremated and scattered into the winds of Gorvax, just as he had ordered. But before he passed, he wrote one final message, a letter, addressed to no one in particular. It read, "They said humans were just a myth, and I believed it, until they appeared at our borders, silent and watching. And I realized then, they weren't ghosts. They were memory, memory that walks, that fights, that waits. And if we forget them again, they'll come back. Not to conquer, but to remind." The letter was placed in the great archive of the free systems, where it would never be hidden again. And across the stars, in every language, one phrase endured. Story passed from parent to child, soldier to poet, teacher to dreamer. Humanity is not a myth. They are the fire in the dark,